Hi everyone.
Hey
How are
guys.
you? We're back for a another open discussion
Yes.
to talk about an article today.
Yep.
Fun. So yeah, and it might get a little controversial or not that this is a trigger warning. I don't give a shit. Um,
No. We're gonna have a frank discussion
just a
because
frank.
it affects our actual field of research, our profession, and what we've spent between the two of us probably 35 years in school for.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And it's important. So what this is, there's an article that just came out. It actually came out in the Archives of Sexual Behavior.
Yep.
It's actually just a guest editorial. It's called Sexual Harassment in the Field of Sexuality Research.
Right. So to start with, guest editorial.
Yes.
It's really important to note this is not research. This is
Right.
six scholars in our field of sexuality who have opined about a particular topic that is relevant to the field from their perspective.
Right. So, any of you people out there who watch this who are young scholars or in college who want to write about sexual harassment, if you cite this article in your paper,
Mm-hmm.
this is not research.
Right.
This is just an editorial.
That's right.
Based on anecdotal experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
Us trying to downplay their personal experience, but it's not research. I think that's important because when stuff shows up in these articles, and I've seen them in papers, people try to cite them. Like, oh, I can cite this. It's in an
They
academic
cite
journal.
editorials?
Well, it's in an academic journal. So why can't I?
Because it's not research. It's an
Right.
opinion.
But if you're a
It
new
would be like
college
citing a
student,
narrative review. You can cite papers that have been in an opinion piece that are based on research, but opinions are not research.
right. But I have seen papers where students, but they see this as being in an academic journal or
Uh-huh.
published by an academic journal, and they think, well, it's an academic journal, it's an academic resource. I can cite it because they don't know the difference a lot of times.
Oh, okay.
So it's important to note that this is not research.
Correct.
So
Right.
going forward.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of criticisms of this piece.
Are there?
And I think,
I haven't seen anything other than
I meant my
positive reviews.
criticism.
Oh, you have
Yeah.
criticism. Oh, yeah, I bet you do.
Yeah. But actually, I haven't seen any out there. I haven't seen any support either,
Okay.
other than Quad S. They posted this article on their page, and I'm sure there are a couple other sites that I don't have that I'm not just don't
Well,
check.
I'm mostly highlighting what I've seen on Twitter.
Yeah.
I'm seeing it reposted constantly with, "Oh, thank God this has finally been written about. Oh, we're so grateful for what they've contributed," and it's just there's a lot of celebration.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's genuine celebration, but there has been quite a bit of celebration.
Or they've actually read the article, or not just the title.
No, I get the impression that they've read the article.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's dive into it. I think we should just jump right in. But actually, before we do that, let me just say that I will give these authors kudos and support and talk about and acknowledge that probably publishing this causes them some anxiety. I mean, they kind of threw themselves out there in this very heated topic,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
This controversial topic, and just kind of, I won't say threw themselves on their sword, but they kind of did. They just said, all right, we are going to attack this head on.
Right.
So they threw this out there. They mentioned their experiences, and they kind of delved deeper into what they consider this to be problematic behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And I commend them for being brave enough to do that. That took a lot. I'll give them that.
Yeah, it can be pretty scary.
Yeah. And, I am on the bandwagon that we should address sexual harassment where it's necessary. Absolutely.
Sure, and some of the examples that they cited in there, which we'll get to later, have happened. I've witnessed them happen. So it's not, I don't get the impression that there's, at least in the examples that are cited, that they're disingenuous or made up.
Right.
So, yeah.
So, and that being said, I think going forward too, it's important that we mention that a lot of our critique, or at least my perspective, and I think yours as well, a lot of our critique is on their analysis or their connection to conferences and social settings of people in academia. So you go to a conference and there's a party afterwards,
Right.
or a party one evening, and there's alcohol and things like that. They cite that a couple times. They cite things in sources or conferences. And I think that's a big chunk of what they're talking about are conferences and social settings. Now,
Right,
they do
so we're not talking about so much workplace harassment, like if you don't do this task, or if you don't provide this sexual service to me, I'm not going to give you a promotion kind of stuff.
Right.
Okay.
They do talk about that a little bit, but they kind of go back and forth between workplace and conference and workplace and conference, and it just gets really muddled. And I think those are two different social settings.
Right.
And I don't want to critique this through workplace sexual harassment because, yeah, that's definitely a problem, and the consequences that they're suggesting as a result of sexual harassment definitely play out in the workplace. And I do see the connection between conferences and workplace. Like, you go and present and someone hits on you and you freak out, or you have this negative experience with that person that can impact your work later. I get that. But I do think there's a difference in social dynamics at a conference versus a workplace. Because, I just feel like there's a difference, and some of their analysis don't speak to that, and they're kind of trying to lump it all together into one.
Right,
rather
there's a
than
lack of delineation between the two, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Rather than looking at the nuance between a conference and a social setting and workplace.
Right. Right. So, in some of our conversations prior to recording, one of the questions that we asked, and to follow up with what you said about conferences, is do we agree with the definition of sexual harassment that they are highlighting here? Right. So there's gender-based discrimination that they brought up, and then there's being sexualized or being hit on, basically, or having sexual comments said to you. And like I said, we have to, like you said, we have to delineate between workplace and conferences.
Right. And that is one of my initial critiques, is their definition of sexual harassment is really broad, is really widespread, and I think it's a little thin. It spreads itself out too thin to be able to really hit home a lot of these points. And actually, at the bottom of page, or the last bit of page 1 is where they get into this definition. Sexual harassment is a form of gender-based maltreatment, or violence that may or may not be sexual and may or may not manifest as frank sexual overtones or acts. And then they talk about gender-based harassment and discrimination, and later on they get into it being derogatory towards someone on the basis of their gender or violations of their gender norms, as with sexual minorities, non-heterosexual men, sexually agenic women, etc., gender-based insults, jokes, and discrimination.
Right.
So it's really broad. It's really it's incorporating sexism in there a lot. And I struggle with their back and forth of this may or may not be sexual, this may or may not be this. Well, if it's not sexual, then it's sexism. If it's and that's a different category. Or if it's not sexual, what kind of harassment is it? Or is it harassment? Or is it just a joke? If I make just a joke that's not a sexual joke, and you get offended by it, is that, what I like puns. What if you hate puns? And you're offended by puns? It's not sexual puns, but So I just feel like they could do better by like really narrowing their definition, um, to make it more concise, to make it clearer, as opposed to this may or may not, um, and things like that. So yeah, and distinguishing it between sexism versus sexual harassment, and I do see the overlap, but that's just my opinion.
Sure.
What are you?
One of the things that I noticed in this paper and what I'm noticing in other forms, and I actually just reposted an article by Dr. David Lay about what service are we providing to people by defining their experiences, let's say, for instance, in sexual harassment, where they are the perpetual victim. Like how, from my perspective, the feel of this paper was be afraid, be very afraid.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that they talked about in sort of supporting this idea was the suggestion that we reject our history as sexologists. We, that our forefathers got into it because they're perverts and predators, and here's the behavior that they exhibited, and everything from beyond 10 years ago should be completely excised from the field, and we should adopt these, safe feminist spaces to be able to conduct our studies and in our profession. And I'm really having a hard time with that.
Yeah, I think their analysis of Kinsey as a foundation of as the history, right? They're using these Kinsey's work and his work environment as a foundation of their argument, and I think they're falling victim of presentism, the idea that we're going to apply modern day morality to history, and you just can't do that. I don't think pre-World War II America was the same as it is now. We're looking at the 1920s and the 1930s. Like, we had a sexual revolution in the 1920s. Like, there's stuff written about it, but I feel like we're still under the control of psychology, right? Psychologists and medical doctors and things like that. So Kinsey's work, it might be seen as, or his work environment might be seen as, scandalous or immoral or tumultuous by today's standards, or what we perceive as today's standards, but we don't know what it was like at the time. We don't know what it was like in the 1920s.
Right.
In that office, it could have been everybody was there because they believed in the mission. They believed that sex was free, that it should be free and examined, and we're all biologists, that it's just biology,
right?
Or components of biology. We don't know that, and I think using today's morality to analyze that work environment, it's just bad analysis. It's agenda-based analysis.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely an agenda. What struck me in that same vein is I'm reading a book right now I'm doing a piece on a book that examines the destruction of the Roman Greco world by the Christians in about the 4th century AD, and this same idea of erasure, and now we look back at that era and realize that the church only preserved 3% of the Roman and the Roman era, and what we lost, and we talk all the time about not forgetting our history. So so that we don't repeat it.
Right.
So by the suggestion that we should erase our history, well, how are we going to learn from our history if we're now saying, oh, well, we have to reject everything? That would almost unravel the entire field.
Right. And I'm in support of people going back and finding these hidden gems of, gay scholars, trans scholars, people of color scholars that just were overshadowed or just not allowed to be a part of the analysis. I think that's really important to go do. But to throw out, several hundred years of science and academic rigor and investigation is just a bad idea.
Right.
You can reanalyze it
exactly
with the new information that's found, which is what you're supposed to do.
Right.
But tossing it out because
we have to come from where we were and build on that.
Right, but tossing it out because it was written by white men or white men of power, you just can't do that. It's bad science.
Well, it also makes the paper sound. I mean, it's already a non-scientific paper, but it makes it sound proselytizing.
Yeah.
More than analytical.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Jump on our bandwagon. And one of the points that they actually address in here, or they mention in here, let me see if I can find it. They talk about that, when people come out as in accusing sexual harassment or claiming sexual harassment, they critique the process. They critique that, if you are a scholar and you critique the evidence of sexual harassment or the study that's been done on sexual harassment, they kind of allude to that you're just being complacent about sexual harassment. Like they're trying to put the topic over the science. So if like an article were to come out about sexual harassment, and maybe it gets torn up by peer review process or scholars or here or there, there's critique of the research. I feel like their sentence in here about complacency would suggest that they're saying that if people do critique that study and they don't like what they find, they're assuming that they're just not liking what they're finding as opposed to critiquing the science of it.
Right.
Then those critics are just complacent about sexual harassment. Right. I'm like, no, that's not how that works.
Right.
And
that's
they
not
also
how science works, right?
Right. And then they talk about how, if somebody comes out as a accusing sexual harassment, that, there's an inquiry and questions and things like that, and the request of proof and evidence. Like, yes, you're in an academic field that requires science and evidence to support your claims.
Right.
Why would you think that wouldn't be required of your social setting as well?
Well, and I just actually saw this today, I think, where something like 17 or 18 universities asked to be, as right now they're renegotiating Title IX. And
really?
That some of these universities have requested, 17 or 18 of them, that the idea of innocent until proven guilty be thrown out.
Wow.
During an inquiry.
Yeah, I think.
Cheers to that.
Yeah. And I think that speaks to something I've said in the past, is that, yes, we should believe women. Absolutely. Whenever they have an accusation, when they have a claim, we should believe them and collect evidence as they are believed, as rightfully so. But we can also believe the men, too, who say they didn't, that this isn't sexual harassment. Just like in any court case, just like in any situation, you have to believe both at the same time, a certain like mental duality, right? That, carrying both logics with you. Like, all right, well, if he did this, then this must happen. If she said, if he didn't do this, then this is the case. Like you have to be able to balance both. That's how all of this works. That's how life works. You can't, it's not black and white like that. Unless of course, somebody finds you raping someone behind a dumpster. it's pretty
Sure.
clear at that point,
Exactly.
you know. But hearsay or this happened in my dorm room, yeah, it sucks. It absolutely sucks. And how we treat accusers is problematic too. I agree that how we treat accuser or accusers or victims is important. Like we, and just as we need to believe both, we need to support both.
Right.
You know, like this person shouldn't lose their job during an investigation. This person shouldn't have death threats because she made a claim. You know, like, and of course that list can go on and on. Like this is a very sensitive and serious topic that knee-jerk reactions to either should be left out. It shouldn't happen. We should allow both to coexist until the truth is found, or until the truth is found.
Right.
Then rightful punishment should be administered.
Now, I worked at a rape crisis center for many years as a group counselor, a group facilitator, and one of the things that I liked about the way that they handled working with people who had been sexually assaulted was, first of all, that they tried to avoid the victim mentality. And so maybe some people will bristle at this, but they used the word survivor. So when someone came in, even if they had been assaulted 2 hours beforehand, they were now a survivor. And I think it really had an impact on the way that they moved through the process of dealing with having been assaulted. I'm not a big fan of using terminology like you're a rape victim, because I think it has the potential to hold someone back from the healing process. And just in my own work, I've seen the use of a word like survivor, empower people to take charge of, to re-empower themselves after having their power been taken from them. So, and that comes back to the idea of, are we doing anyone a service by elevating up victimhood?
Right. And you're right. You hit this earlier, and I think you're coming back to it. I feel like this article is on the bandwagon of the eternal victimhood of women. That men are perpetually dangerous, that all men are dangerous, that all men are out to get you.
Right. So, you brought this up a little while ago about, that it kind of promotes this idea that men wake up in the morning to make sure they reach their sexual harassment quota.
Right, and I feel like that's the flip side of the eternal victimhood. Is what I call what they allude to, and what I will call the conscious harasser.
The conscious harasser.
The conscious harasser. The guy, the assumption that, the guy is going to wake up and you're right. I haven't hit my sexual harassment quota for today. I'm going to this conference, it's a sexuality conference. I can definitely make good numbers there of my sexual harassment.
Exactly.
People don't do that. That's not a thing. People wake up with the idea of being being a sexual harasser.
Right.
On page 6, it talks about that too. On page 6, in that first column, on the left column, it said many who sexually harass do so with the conscious intent of causing harm or discomfort. I don't believe that.
I can't sign on to that now. And I say that coming from somewhat of a place of expertise, and as I was doing my doctoral work, it became necessary to study people with cluster A, B, and C disorders. Okay. And sure, there are people that are predisposed towards violence, towards the violation of others, but that's generally can be attributed to one of these disorders in these clusters. And it doesn't start with sexual harassment. It starts with It starts way earlier than that. It starts with, being a jerk to the waitress at the restaurant. It starts with, you know, not giving a crap if you feed your dog today. It starts way earlier than, oh, and the thing is that, especially with people on the spectrum, don't consciously think about harming people. That's just their disposition.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So this this blanket idea of these people wake up intentionally looking to harass, even the literature doesn't support that.
Right. Especially if we're talking about harassment. We can also talk about sexual assault and sexual violence. Like the I feel like since we'll say 2002, the claiming sexual assault has gained a lot of support than it has in the past. As such, I feel like men are really conscious of their behavior. Men are becoming more conscious of behavior around women. They're not sure how to act, and you have that flip side, and say in the last 6 years or so, people like and keeping distance or trying to negotiate these social settings. And like I said, there is more support of sexual harassment claims than sexual assault claims. So if sexual assault claims, the support is going up. But according to other sources like the FBI and things like that, police reports, the cases of sexual assault and sexual harassment are going down.
Right. Right.
So reporting support is going up, but cases, and they have been going down. The 1 in 5 argument, right? The 1 in 5 women, college-age women, are going to be sexually assaulted. Is inaccurate. And in fact, the original people who wrote that have said this is not the analysis that you're supposed to use. That's not how this is supposed to be used. It's within their lifetime, not at college, not in the 4 years they're at college.
Right.
Because, I've heard this argument too, and it makes sense. Like, if you knew that there was a 20% chance that you were going to be sexually assaulted, would you go to this institution?
Exactly. Yeah.
No, because that's not accurate. Is there sexual assault in college? Yes. Is there sexual harassment in college and rape in college? Yes, there is. Absolutely.
But the definition of sexual assault, not sexual assault, sexual harassment is changing. And we talked about this earlier, that increasingly it appears that women under the age of 35 see the man who walks up to them at the bar and asks them if he can buy them a drink as harassment, whereas women over 35 are just like, yeah or no.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the notion of eternal victimhood, right? The idea of the conscious harasser, the conscious male predator.
Yeah.
And yes, there are men out there. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. There are predators out there. We have a whole exhibit built around, at the museum, we have a whole exhibit built around predators might not look like you think they're going to look like. Right. That eliminates the idea, and people bristle at that, especially feminists bristle at that. There's this whole idea about there's no such thing as the bumbling man. Right. And my response to that, and I think we talked about it earlier, is what about, people on the autism spectrum who struggle reading social cues? Are we just going to erase them? So they're all predators too? And especially in academia, I think you've made this point in the past, a lot of smart people could potentially be on the spectrum. Right. And
they are. A lot of academics are on the spectrum. I think that's what allows you to be an academic, is that, we talk about different types of intelligence, emotional intelligence, and say rote memorization, analysis, like critical thinking. There's different types of intelligence. There's also social intelligence.
Right.
That, as we talk about a lot in sociology, but it doesn't get talked about in a lot of other places. Social intelligence is the ability to navigate those social realms, those social cues, social norms. Um, and if not everybody has the same level of intelligence, just like not everybody has the same IQ, not everybody has the same social IQ.
And I think our social intelligence is going down because we're behind computer screens and on our phones more.
I think so too. I think also one aspect that doesn't get kind of put together is in a lot of these analysis too is the notion of biological sex drives versus social norm sex drives, things like that. You see this a lot in these critiques in feminist literature about how there's no such thing as a sex drive, that it's all social construction and or this and that. And I do believe there is a lot of aspect of sexuality that is socially constructed.
But you can't go to black and white.
Well, right, it's not black and white, but plus, like when you talk about social intelligence, sexual intelligence is social intelligence.
Right, and how do we learn that sexual intelligence? They brought up in the paper that really we should just avoid hitting on each other completely, except when the creepy old guy is hitting on us, then we should do a call out. We should go out and we should to that person and we should, are you okay? And you're exhibiting creepy behavior and this kind of thing. And maybe you're dealing with an older person who is on the spectrum or who's never been successful sexually,
or has a different,
who doesn't have a lot of investment in the sexual marketplace. They just haven't had a lot of opportunity. I have a personal friend who's a 45-year-old virgin.
Yeah,
he struggles negotiating this stuff. And
I think
as
there is a level
don't we have a responsibility to help people learn how to communicate around sexual topics?
Right, and so if we take it back to this article, I think there's a couple points that they talk about that we can critique in their misuse of this information. They talk about that, yes, you're going to have these experiences and these connections with people. I think they talk about, we're not talking about flirting, we're not talking about consensual interactions. But the thing is, you don't know something's consensual until it happens.
Yeah, they talk about we have to call out creepy behavior and, we have to define boundaries for people. And I'm like, who's defining those boundaries? Why do you get to define them for someone else? And how are two people gonna figure out what the boundaries are unless they have these awkward interactions to begin with?
Right.
Even the best person who knows how to communicate sexually is going to walk up to someone and say, you know what, this is kind of awkward, but I'm wondering, I've noticed you and I find you attractive, and is it perhaps it's reciprocated, and if so, would you like to join me for a cup of tea or something? That is awkward, and that's really good communication.
Yeah, and I think so. They either say, and they try to break away from just flirting or consensual, these interactions. But again, you don't know when they are. I think what they're calling for is just not to do that ever. Don't do that in academic conferences or even the social settings. They talk about that social settings, there's alcohol, there's stuff like this, alcohol and partying and people get a little more free. Yeah, that's the point, because we get stuffy in academia and we need these parties to cut loose. Now, being a predator is bad, absolutely, but being an awkward person isn't. And being an awkward person and being a little buzzed might make it worse, might make it better, who knows? Sometimes that social lubrication can be good. I think in this article, they kind of go back and forth on, that victimhood and basically trying to just desexualize the entire environment. And one of the points that they make, and I agree with it and I disagree with it. One of the points they make, which ties into what you're saying, is that sexual researchers shouldn't be expected to be more sexually open. Okay, I agree with it. On a premise, I agree with that, because I have experienced that. I've tried to talk to people like, hey, I'm a sex researcher, and then they immediately jump to the conclusion that A, I want to fuck them, or B, I must be some sexual deviant, or a sex addict.
Yeah, I've gotten the, oh, well, then you must be really good at sex. And
right.
my response always is, well, I don't know. It depends on the person I'm with and whether or not we jive. That usually shuts that stuff down.
Right.
Yeah, I get that all the time too.
And I think in the field of academic or sexual research, not having that assumption is safe. But I also think having a little bit of that assumption should be necessary, because if you're going in this field, you shouldn't blush easy. Like, if you're going to be a surgeon, you shouldn't get squeamish about the inside of a body. Mm-hmm. If you're going to be a sex researcher, you shouldn't be squeamish about talking about sex, even if it's your own, because that's where we draw a lot of our inspiration. Mm-hmm. This is example. This is their own personal experience, which they are drawing upon to make this article. They are saying, we shouldn't have to talk about our sexual experiences at academic conferences, but yet they're talking about their sexual experiences to create this conversation. Mm-hmm. Like, if we can talk about our experiences in not like a creepy way or a bragging way or something like that, I think it gives a more robust analysis of what we're trying to get at. Of these points. Like, you should be able to talk about your sexual experiences in a very open manner, but not in a creepy manner. You should be able to say, hey, in my sexual experience, this happened, this occurred, or I've had this, women do this, my partners do this. Like, they can be part of the narrative, right, as long as they're not being salacious or used as a way to harass. Mm-hmm. And I think this article is getting that we shouldn't even talk about our personal sexual experiences. We shouldn't talk about our personal sex lives. Mm-hmm. We shouldn't be expected to be sexually open. Yes, I agree that you shouldn't expect to be sexually open, but if you are going to be in a sex research field, it doesn't hurt to be more sexually open about things, to be able to discuss them.
And I don't think that it helps to separate those who do embrace that stereotype. I don't think that if they are sexually open or they do want to have a lot of sex at conferences with other people, that should call their research into question.
Yeah.
Which is right. Another thing that it seems like they're suggesting, is, at least as it pertains to the generations before us.
Right.
Yeah. And because they were sexual people, they're automatically predators, and automatically we should question what they've done.
Right.
Academically.
And then conversely, in the same article, they talk about having more inclusive, supportive, and safe spaces for people to present and do their research. People of color, queer folk, trans folk, people like that. Mm-hmm. But here's the thing. Are you asking for space for them to do rigorous academic support, or are you saying that they shouldn't be critical?
Right.
People shouldn't be critical of their work.
Right. We shouldn't examine their work and be critical of it. Right.
That's the image. That's the impression that I got, is that they're trying to be overly sensitive to these areas without giving them the same scientific rigor that they would give other people. And I think that's a dangerous slippery slope to get into. Mm-hmm. And plus, if I were a queer trans person or something like that, I would be offended by that statement. Right. I don't want my research to get velvet gloves put on it and, right, and get treated with kid gloves or what have you. Like, no, I want it to go through the rigor. I want someone to say, oh, this is complete crap and here's why. Now, if you're saying it's complete crap because of their gender or sexuality or something like that, mm-hmm, yeah, that's a problem, and that should be addressed.
Right.
But if there's a statistical anomaly where these people are being overly criticized or critiqued for their work, absolutely, that's something to look into. Mm-hmm. But just a general statement of saying, oh, these people should have these safer spaces to be able to conduct their research and publish their research. Right. No, right, that's not how this works. And nor should it.
There was a part in the paper that talked about, and I think I want to sort of take this a little bit further. What you're talking about is agency, it sounds like, and I want to expand on that. When we talk about relationships where there's power differentials, and one of the examples they gave was, students should be safe going to school and being able to do their academic work without being harassed by their professors. And the question that immediately comes to my mind is, well, yes, I agree. You shouldn't be harassed by your professors if you're a sexuality student. Absolutely. Because there are the power differentials. And sometimes, let's say you're a student who's going back to school, you've worked in an office all your adult life, and now at 40 you decide you want to go back to school and you want to be a sexuality researcher, and you happen to develop a crush on your 60-year-old professor. What then? Is it just automatically, no, it's a blanket, it doesn't matter that the two of you are adults, it's exploitive? Or can we trust that adults can have a conversation about the consequences of the power differential, and whether or not their relationship is going to affect the student's ability to move on successfully in their scholastic pursuits?
Or what if you're at a conference and, you're this 40-year-old woman and you meet a 60-year-old professor at another school who maybe sits on a chair of some committee or something, and you do fuck him, and he does give you an opportunity because of your work. Like, that doesn't downgrade your work. You just had sex with them. Those are two different, we need to be able to separate those two.
Right.
And in talking your question about when that might be appropriate as a professor or someone, who's taught classes, like I've taught a sexuality class, and I've gotten the flirty front row. I know what I look like. I know how I present myself. And while, because I was the sexuality class and I'm a young professor, I didn't bridge that, I didn't approach that or bridge that gap because I didn't want to start that. I didn't want a reputation at the school I was teaching at. But I would say after your grades are turned in, this person no longer has any connection to you for the most part. So if I say after grades turned in and that power dynamic is gone, why not? Who's to say you can't? Plus, I hate to say it, and this is terrible as it sounds, and I'm not trying to blame victims or anything like that, but I have heard so many stories from women about how when they were younger, they fucked their professor and it was this great experience. It was just something they wanted to do. And I think this article and this idea of this eternal victimhood, and this is, I think, what's her name, Catherine Deneuve, and those other French women wrote in this article, or that article a couple of years ago, were getting at, is that women, I think we think of college women as still being super young and naive and not having agency to want to do these things. And we have to realize that, they're adults. You have 22, 21-year-olds who, or even younger, who do have some sexual wherewithal that want to explore these things and maybe are attracted to older men or something like that. These dynamics and nuances exist. To just blanket it out and say, don't do this, I think pulls agency from people. Now, should you fuck your students while you're teaching them? No. Should you fuck people in your department when you have power over them, like the chair fucking grad students? No, you shouldn't do that. Does it happen? Yes. I don't support it because you're right, it does get muddy. But if you're a professor fucking a student in a different department that has no connection to this person and has no ability to impact their life, why not? Who gives a shit? Are you a grad student in kinesiology, fucking a psychology student? Undergrad? Who gives a shit? You're two completely different departments, two completely different fields. This grad student has no real power over them other than they took their 101 class, maybe a couple years ago. That's how they met. I have a buddy who actually married one of his former students.
Right.
So it happens. It's there.
It does.
And to rip that agency from people.
My point is, it feels like we're taking the agency away from, at least in this paper, away from women to be able to negotiate these things and learn from them, those experiences, right? Rather than saying, no, you are going to be victimized, so just stay away from your professors outside class.
Right.
Don't have lunch with them. Don't do any of this stuff because you don't know how to navigate these things. You don't have the wherewithal to negotiate these things.
Mm-hmm.
You are just going to be exploited. Period. End of story.
Right. And the foundation for a lot of that kind of shift gears a little bit to hit this article, is that when we're talking about conferences, we're talking about these social settings. You talked about, don't take this professor, don't talk to this professor, are based on whisper networks. And we've talked about whisper networks in our toxic femininity video, and that's how I feel about them, that whisper networks are in fact gossip. They're gossip. They, yes, can be beneficial. Their history is within sex workers who don't have those strong social ties to be able to say, hey, this is an abusive client, or this is a bad client. Like, they're important. I support that. But whisper networks in other places is gossip.
Well,
a lot of
we've learned
hearsay and third-party gossip.
Right. Here in the States, I went to school in 2 different countries. They didn't teach us this over in Germany, but here in the States, I remember I don't know, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, the telephone game.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't really know if someone started it because, at a conference they got hit on by, they're a 20-something lecturer who got hit on by, one of the 60-year-old keynote speakers, that they didn't say, oh, well, he did this to me out of, that they were so grossed out by this person hitting on them that they said, oh yeah, he's this horrible monster, and it ends up turning into, getting to the point where a career is destroyed because, someone that was 40 years older than you asked you to the bar.
Mm-hmm.
When there's no, that person didn't harm you. They just asked you to go for a drink, and you said no.
Right, and I think what you just said hit on my two of my last critiques, components of this article that I think the author should consider redressing, is whether they did this consciously or not. Mm-hmm. Whether they when they wrote this, they were realizing what they were writing. They talk about senior faculty, senior scholars, senior this, senior that.
Senior men.
A lot in this article, and they mean senior men. Right. They're talking about older men. And to me, that kind of screams some ageism in this article, that these women, and I know 1 or 2 of them personally, well, it's been a while, but I know them, and I'm almost willing to bet that there's some element of that they're tired of being hit on by older men that they find creepy. That they're just older men. They're older white guys, they're gray-haired, they're in these sexual environments, and they are more sexually open, because I tell you, I took a class at IU with this, he's gay, I believe he's gay, but he was an old Kinsey guy, a later generation Kinsey guy, and he was rowdy, he was sexual, you could see it, you'd hear it the way he talked on his class, which I model my class after. He does speak frankly. He is like this sexual person, but I feel like people give him leeway in these avenues because he's gay. Oh, he's not harmful, he's gay. You're right, he's not harmful. Just like these older men that you don't like being hit on by aren't harmful. You are taking it as harmful. And that gets into my second point of this is, on top of this underlying, whether it be implicit or explicit ageism, is this consequences of sexual harassment. They talk about this repeatedly in the article, consequences of sexual harassment, and I feel like they blur the lines between consequences of sexual harassment, and consequences of sexual violence, and presumed consequences of being sexualized. Actually, it's not sexualized, it's objectified.
Objectification.
And I think there's some difference. Being sexualized is not inherently bad unless you think it's bad.
Mm-hmm.
I'm differentiating between sexualization and objectification. Mm-hmm. Objectification is being seen as an object and treated as such. Being sexualized is being seen as a sexual object, right? Mm-hmm. Being flirted with, being seen as attractive, and whatnot, and being flirted with as an attractive sexual being, being. And if you have trauma or internal issues with being sexualized, yes, you're going to have these negative reactions. You're going to have these feelings of humiliation. You're going to have these feelings of being belittled or downplayed, especially if you see yourself as such. Just like any kind of mental health issue, like your paraphilias, they're only problems if you think they're a problem.
Right.
If someone making a sexual joke towards you, if you don't have a problem with it, it's not going to be a problem.
Right.
So going back to earlier when you were talking about policing other people's behavior, essentially policing other people's behavior is putting your own sense of sexual morality onto a situation that you are not a part of, on someone else. Yeah. And I think that gets really dicey, and I think it's important to at least check your own sexual biases and sexual limitations and hang-ups when we're talking about sexual harassment.
And that, you generally, at least in my experience, is an integral part of a SAR.
Yeah,
in order to be an effective sexological researcher or sex therapist or what have you, part of the SAR is to challenge yourself. I know when I went through a SAR, something came up that I wasn't expecting at all that I would be uncomfortable with. Mm-hmm. And so once I recognized that, I recognized, that's probably a population that I'm not going to be able to work with, right? Mm-hmm. But that's on me. That's my stuff.
Right.
That their practices are none of my business. I'm just not going to go there professionally. Mm-hmm. And then in my training as a therapist, when I was going through therapy school, one of the biggest lessons that we kept getting told over and over and over and over again is, you don't know what's best for your client. You can believe that you know what's best for your client, but really you don't. And to say, well, you should do this or you should do that when you're in a counseling session or what have you is doing a disservice to the client that's sitting in front of you, because now you're telling them what to do. You're not asking them you're not opening up the door for them to consider what might be best for them. And I think this is the same thing. If someone's if you believe that you're seeing someone being sexually harassed, first, I think anyway, sit back and watch what's going on and ask yourself, am I projecting my own perceptions onto it, or am I really seeing what I'm seeing here?
Right. And I think the flip side of that too is when we're talking about one's openness to sexual openness and their idea of being sexualized and how that fits, should be examined too. And I think there's this expectation that if someone approaches another individual and they are we'll say triggered or offended by something that they're saying, that people should just know better. People should just know not to do that. They should be able to read these cues. And you talked about people in academia being somewhat on the spectrum sometimes. Absolutely. And so are accusers. They're on the spectrum too. You have people who can't read social cues, can't do this, can't do that. And they're at these academic conferences, they're at these social settings. And then you have people who can't flirt either. And it's just a combination of disaster.
Right.
But we never talk about that. We never talk about the social intelligence of the accuser.
Right.
You know, and I'm not trying to victim blame here. I'm trying to get to the nuance of these situations in the context of this article. That you're dealing with people who may not have the sexual social intelligence to navigate these things, and then, you know, not be able to navigate the aftermath of being called out.
Right.
You know, or calling someone out, having the sense of power and wherewithal. Because the consequences that they're suggesting happen of sexual harassment are feelings. They're not actual manifest, like tangible reactions. They're feelings. They're how you make you feel.
Yeah.
And if you don't have control of your emotions, you're probably going to have a negative reaction to it. But someone can't read that on your face.
Right.
Which I'll get to later. You know, or you're not going to have a reaction to it, and it's not going to matter. You know, I use myself as just as they're using their experience, I'll use my own. I was a bouncer for a long time. I got sexually harassed by everyone, for the most part. Like jokingly sexually harassed by straight men. I got groped by gay men. I got groped by women. You know, I got sexually harassed, like I said, harassed by everyone.
Right.
But it didn't impact me. Like I didn't think I was less of a bouncer because I got sexually harassed. And I realized this is slightly different, but you know, I didn't think I was any less of an academic because I was a bouncer when I was an academic. I didn't think I was any less of an academic because I got sexually harassed as a bouncer. Or, you know,
well, again,
said I look handsome or something like that.
You're applying the term sexual harassment to yourself. You know, I still work in an environment and largely have for my whole career where, you know, sexual jokes and bantering are just part of the vernacular. That's how we interact with each other. And I don't feel victimized by it. It's, you know, it's kind of like verbal sparring. And so I, you know, what other people might interpret as sexual harassment and some of the ways that we interact with each other. And I get it from men more than I get it from women, you know, and to me, it's just, you know, it's bantering, it's verbal sparring, and I walk away from the experience not really thinking about it because I got other stuff that I don't feel victimized by it.
Right.
So, but if I was at a conference and someone approached me like that and was starting to spar with me, I would be really pissed off if they walked up and go, "You're sexually harassing her. You know, are you okay?" I would probably go, "Get the fuck away from me."
Right.
I'm fine.
Right. And I think they list examples of sexual harassment, but they never list examples of cis men being sexually harassed, heterosexual cis men being harassed. It happens.
Oh, sure.
But we'll say the behavior of what we could be construed as sexual harassment does happen to men. The difference is, and they talk about that it happens more to women, it's reported more by women. It happens to men. Men just don't report it. So I think an analysis needs to look at why, should men report it? Do they feel like they need to? Does it have the same effect? And if it doesn't have the same effect, why does it have a different effect for men? Is it because men value being sexualized?
Right.
Because if you value that, which I do.
Right.
Which I do. Which I do. I value being sexualized. I work on my body. I work on my mind. I like being sexualized. But I know if I'm being sexualized and people are talking to me just like you're talking about the banter, like if I'm witty and I can roll with it, I like that. It's great. And it doesn't make my academic.
It can be a lot of fun.
It doesn't make my academic worth any less at all.
Right. And I've talked to men who work in the sex industry, like male dancers, etc. And, you know, I've asked them these questions. I was like, well, you know, how do you feel about, you know, women, you know, like a male review sexualizing you? And their response to me was, I freaking love it because I don't get that in the normal world. And I feel like here women can sexualize me and objectify me, and I love it. I wish more women did that every day. You know, so I think men and their experiences are left out of this conversation. But their argument is, well, this happens mostly to women, and that's why we're talking about it.
Right.
Right.
Because it's reported more by women. Not that it happens more necessarily, and it may, but it's reported more for sure.
Right.
Because that's what they're basing it off of, their own reports. Because keep in mind, all the authors of this page are women.
Right.
There's no men authors in this paper.
Right.
All right, so I'm going to wrap this up. I think because at the end they talk about ending sexual harassment in the field, like steps that can be taken. Oh, the first step they talk about, which I agree with, is stop sexual harassment. Stop participating in harassment when it occurs. Okay, if you're in a situation, harassment is occurring, yeah, and you see someone being visibly uncomfortable or someone saying, hey, they're uncomfortable, support that person, absolutely. Or, dudes, I'll speak to you, dudes, like, if you're not real good at this, maybe an academic conference or a professional setting isn't the best place to try to like hone your chops on being flirty. Don't try to take your game to a place where, women need support in other ways. Like, know your audience. You know what I mean? Like, if it's in a social setting after a conference, okay, maybe, but like, again, know your audience and know where you are.
Well, and I want to add to that. I think we need to also make room for awkward moments. It's generally going to be awkward when you're interested in someone and you approach them to inquire whether or not that interest is reciprocated. It's just awkward, even for those of us who are practiced at this, and I mean, anyone that I've dated, that first conversation, I'm a little nervous and I'm a little like, okay, do I want to make sure I pick the right words? Generally, I'm a little bit more blunt and people appreciate that, but not all the time. So make space for it being awkward sometimes rather than going, ooh, you're creepy.
Right. Which would be some of the take homes for if, by chance one of these authors sees this video. Some of the critique I would give them is like, let's examine agency in your analysis. Let's examine the experiences of men in sexual harassment in these situations too, to see if there's a difference between the behavior towards them versus behavior towards women. And also, where's your view or personal opinions about being sexualized?
And let's take a look also at
here are these internal. How does that then manifest your negotiation of a situation that could be defined as flirting, could be defined as a joke, and how your personal feelings impact your reaction to what's being said.
Which I think also plays into what you brought up earlier about what appears to be ageism in the paper.
Yeah, and the analysis page is ageism throughout the paper. Like, you may not realize you did it, but it's there. And if you did do it, you might want to check that, because older men are sexual men too.
You know what? They really are. I had the good fortune of sitting with a group of 5 men recently. There was a conference in town, and I sat with men of all kinds of ages, but they were all over 40, and a few were over 55. And I really enjoyed the opportunity to listen, and a lot of what they're saying is they're already, as they get older, they're already invisible. And a lot of times we attribute invisibility and age to women, but a lot of these men are saying the same thing. They're like, I'm already becoming invisible, and now because I'm older, if I show any kind of sexual interest whatsoever, I'm automatically a creep. I'm automatically that gross old guy. I'm not only am I invisible, but now I'm disgusting too. And I think we need to, I think we do humanity a disservice when we erase people or when we define them sexually as disgusting.
Right. I think we're trying to make
that's like antithetical to what our profession is about. I mean, we're about at least for me, part of my job is to make space for people to accept themselves and be comfortable with themselves, and to whether it's older women or older men, it's not okay to erase them. They're sexual
Right.
beings just like everyone else is. It doesn't stop just because you turn 50.
Right. And the solutions that they offer, as ending these long-term approaches to ending sexual harassment in our field. One of their suggestions: just open up different jobs to different people of minorities. Well, okay, that's where I struggle. Are they qualified? Are they a good candidate for that position?
Mm-hmm.
Then their sexuality shouldn't matter. Like,
right.
I don't jump on the bandwagon, the diversity bandwagon, for the sake of diversity. I jump on the diversity bandwagon when that scholar is a good scholar, not because of their gender or sexuality.
Right.
So they kind of contradict themselves in this paper that, we shouldn't be, we shouldn't base critique on someone's gender or sexuality, in an academic setting, but then we should open up these positions to different genders and sexuality. So it's like, well, do you want to address their gender and sexuality, or do you want to leave it out, or what? Like, work
There's some
with me.
confusion there, yeah. There's inconsistency.
Right. And then my solution, my last bit that I will end on, a good solution to prevent sexual harassment at conferences is when you get your lanyard,
You
get
are
these
gonna
ribbons.
you are gonna be snarky right now, aren't you?
I'm going to be snarky. It's more of a joke. I'm trying to make a joke.
Okay.
Right? When you get your lanyard, you get your name on it, school you're from, something like that.
Yeah.
Right? You get these ribbons. And some people get a bunch of ribbons that they attach to their lanyard.
Right.
Like,
Pins
I'm a
and
first-time scholar, poster presenter, or like 10-year or 25-year veteran, or not veteran, but like
right.
scholar, something like, it's all these things. I think they need to make more ribbons because they do have sexuality ribbons. I've seen those.
Yeah, I went to one and it said my pronouns are.
Right, pronoun ribbons, things like that. You should have ribbons for, I don't know, something of like easily triggered or previous sexual trauma, or that way I don't have to, just as you want people to read your mind, they don't have to.
What about something that you brought up earlier? I'm here to flirt.
Yeah, here to flirt, or not here to flirt, or vigorous slut, or something like that. Like, I'm here to fuck older men. Like, let's make little ribbons so everybody knows where everybody stands. So then, there's no ambiguity. You don't have to have these people who are socially awkward trying to negotiate the social environment. Everybody just has their little list on their lanyard, and you'd be like, okay, we can talk, or all right, I'll see you later. Or if you're going to talk to this person, that you shouldn't say certain things. Like, rather than policing each other's language, give people the opportunity to police their own language based on your laundry list or what have you of potential hazards.
Okay, so I'm going to be devil's advocate here for a minute. Because of our sex negative culture, I think those who have risen up through the ranks to become, quote unquote, famous keynote speakers, I think if they are spotted with a lanyard that says "I'm here to fuck," that might be prohibitive in their pursuit of being taken seriously by, say, let's say they consult government agencies. So I like the idea and its principle, but I think our sex negative society, again, is going to be punitive, and that's why we do our job.
Well, these are supposed to be sex research fields. Conferences is a sex research field. And if you get torn apart because you have a ribbon that says "here to fuck," then the people that tear you apart shouldn't be in that field, because they are putting their hangups on you. In the sexuality field.
In the sexuality field, yeah. I'm in the sexuality field, yeah. I don't know. I can't top that. I think that's a good place to end.
Yeah. Ribbons, that's what we need. Identity ribbons. Yeah. All right. Well,
that would be an amazing experiment in and of itself.
Wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because then it'd be like all the people with like here to flirt, here to fuck are like way over here together.
Yeah.
Maybe it wouldn't have the greatest effect, but you get the point.
It
I'm
certainly
staying
stir
away from them.
conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm staying away from them. They're just here to, get laid.
Yep. Well, I'm glad we talked about this. This is something that I've been really sort of ruminating on since it came out,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm glad we took the time to do that. So for the viewers, um, this is something that Josh and I are going to do more often. He's in Okinawa currently, living there. So while we can't be in the same place, yeah, well, we can't be in the same place doing our show. There's still really important topics that we feel we need to discuss. So this is going to be our format for a while until he comes back
Right.
this summer.
This summer.
Back to the States. So, and actually, I have a friend who lives in Florida, so there'll be a reason for me to visit him in Florida, and we can maybe shoot together in the same place. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I like how this went, and hopefully, if you have any comments, you agree or disagree with anything we've talked about, different points, if you read the article and want to add to our conversation about it, do so in the comments below.
We're totally okay being critiqued.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's totally okay to critique us. That's part of the joy of science is it can sometimes get ugly, but if we do it in a way that's sound, we can get to the truth.
Yeah.
Or the facts.
The facts or something.
Something.
Yeah. Understanding.
And a better understanding of the world around us. Yeah.
That's right. All right. Thanks for joining us.
See you guys later.
Time.
Bye.